Welcome to Classic Value Investors. My name is Mariusz, and today we're going to talk a little bit about uh, inflation, gold, Federal Reserve. And today online with me I have Maneco64, who has his own YouTube channel, and I've been listening to some of his stuff. It's pretty good, and I thought I would have him on and talk a little bit about the stuff that he already talks about with his audience. Maneko, you go as Mario, am I correct?
Yeah, my name's Mario as well, like you.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
So thank you very much for joining me. If you don't mind, can you take a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell my audience what you are all about?
sure. I started out my career in Switzerland. After university, I had a got a degree in international relations and economics, and I got a job for a small private bank in Geneva. I worked there for 2 years, and then I was asked by a friend to come and work with him at a big bond brokerage firm in London. And yeah, and then I went into futures and options, but always on the in the bond markets, interest rates. My clients were institutional clients, so banks, funds, corporates. They were not private clients. And then I left the city in 2012. The firm I worked for, they shut down our desk. I decided to try something else, a small business. For a couple of years, I bought a franchise, pawnbroking franchise. That didn't really, it worked out, but I just liquidated it. It wasn't making enough money to make it worthwhile. And then I tried to get back into the city, into which is like the Wall Street of London, but it was tough at my age. So I decided to start making videos late 2015 and to cover precious metals, the markets, and economics. And aside from working in the city, I got an interest in gold in 2002 when I bought a few Krugerrands and I started looking into gold. I didn't know anything about gold and monetary history at university. They don't teach you those things, the mainstream. And so I decided to talk to the public on YouTube, pretty much how I used to speak to my clients, tell them where the markets are, but also explaining to the general public the intricacies of bond markets, interest rates, stock markets, precious metals, and also how the our monetary system is so fragile. Uh, we have no anchor, of course. The U.S. went off gold in 1971 internationally, and that's where the inflation comes in. So I've been doing my videos since late 2015, and it's gone quite well. It's grown steadily. So that's my background.
Okay, very well. Um, you probably don't know this. Obviously, you don't know this. I am in the United States right now, but I was born in Poland, so we're not too far away, considering you're in England.
Yeah,
And I personally experienced inflation when I was a kid. We were all millionaires at some point,
yeah.
and I remember my mom had money saved up for a house down payment, and by the time the hyperinflation was done in Poland, all that money was able to buy her was a dishwasher.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot to tell your viewers and listeners, I'm actually originally from Brazil. I was born and I grew up in Brazil. We had the same problem. And that's why I've been always interested in inflation and money.
Right, you had the first hand experience with it. So you know when central banks go wild with money printing, you experienced it yourself how it can end up with the purchasing power. The problem with people in the United States is that, or even in the Western world, maybe except Germany, they didn't really experience it. So therefore, it will never happen, right?
That's what they think, yeah.
Right. Okay, so when it comes to uh, inflation, because inflation, gold, and Federal Reserve, I mean, really, you can't understand one without understanding the other. So, what is so unique now about the economic world that we live in right now that should have people be more interested in gold and wanting to learn more about what it is?
Yeah, I would have to go back to 1914, just before World War One, because before that, there was very little fiat currency. The world was on a gold standard, and then World War One started, and people thought, the warring countries thought it was going to be over very quickly. So, but then they realized it was going to keep going. So they suspended the gold standard, which basically means under a gold standard, if you have 1 ounce of gold, let's say is $20.67, uh, banks need to make sure that if someone comes with a $20 bill or note, bank note, that they're able to give them, the $20 gold piece, which is just under an ounce, of course. And that's and what the gold standard used to do up until really 1971 to some extent, because it wasn't a pure gold standard, is that it anchors the monetary system. It doesn't allow the bankers and the central banks to create infinite amount of credit, because it has to be based on some kind of backing, like gold. And if you look at all the charts, for example, for the U.S. national debt and even the U.K. national debt, if you go back to the early 70s, you can see it starts going up because there's no gold anchor anymore. And they've been able to, of course, keep it going. I think it was Paul Volcker who allowed rates to go to 20% in 1980. He killed off a little bit the inflation of the 70s, and they've been able to inflate since then. Uh, but the thing is, nowadays people call inflation the CPI, which is actually a measure of prices, and that's the way they get. That's how they get away with it. The central bankers and the economists and the bankers, they say, "Oh, we don't have any inflation. Look at CPI; it's 1%." But real inflation is the excessive creation of money and credit out of thin air, not from savings. And gold and silver used to discipline the bankers, but it also disciplined politicians. Because if you look at Europe, Western Europe, prior to the 60s, the welfare state was very small. So, with the abandonment of gold in 1971, it became a lot easier for the bankers and the politicians to scratch each other's back because they didn't have the discipline of gold. I really recommend people read an essay that Alan Greenspan wrote in 1966 when he was still not a central banker and he was a gold bug. I think he still is, but it's called Gold and Economic Freedom, and it explains exactly why a gold standard, a gold-based system is so important to economic freedom of the general public. Because if you allow the bankers, central bankers, and the commercial banks that are tied up very closely to the central banks to control the issuance of money out of thin air, you're going to get all these boom and busts that we've been getting. And this latest bust here that we've had this year, and you can say it was triggered by the health crisis, and I think it was, but it was going to happen anyway because we've had a big bubble since '08, because they had to inflate even more to save the system. That's why you keep getting it. And this is the mother of all bubbles. So you see the Federal Reserve, they've increased their balance sheet from just over 4 trillion in February, and we're now at 7 trillion almost. And that's inflation, and it's gonna it's all to do with the law of supply and demand. The more money and credit you create, eventually it's going to seep through into the real economy, and it's going to chase all the goods and services out there. And central bankers and bankers, they can create this with no effort, just typing on a keyboard. While in the real economy, we have to actually do something productive, produce things or provide services, and we can't keep up with that. And that's when you get the rising prices, all this money chasing fewer goods. And that's basically what inflation is. It's not the CPI. So, and unfortunately, all the schools and universities for the last 40, 30 years, they teach people that inflation is CPI. They don't look at the true definition of it.
Well, as the word inflation, it means inflate, and it means
That's right.
inflate the money supply.
That's right.
And as you're saying, when you inflate the money supply, it has to go somewhere, and it can go into the price of goods that we buy in the stores. It can also go into financial goods. So when we see the stock market going up like every day, like there's no tomorrow, that's inflation too, even though you might not necessarily see a
Yeah,
huge.
that's the consequence of the inflation, the rising prices of stocks, and also bonds. You know, they've been going up since 1981. The price of bonds, treasury bonds. But I think now, with all the fiscal stimulus and almost like helicopter money that they're putting into the economy, that money and credit is going to start flowing into goods and the real economy, and then people are going to actually say, "Well, we have actually inflation," even though, of course, it's not inflation, but in the way they've been told what it is.
Right. Now, when you see a lot of times when you see central bankers of other countries do what the central bank of the United States does, their their currency takes a hit. But a lot of times the US currency in the short term at least doesn't take a hit because the US is the reserve currency. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's not only the U.S. currency. You see, if you look at the major countries, the UK, France, Germany, Japan, who else? Yeah, the United States, Canada, Australia. These people, the central bankers in these countries are very tied together. Their governments are tied together. It's like the G7, OECD countries, and they manipulate their currencies. Because, for example, if Brazil was trying to do what the UK is doing now, or the US, printing trillions of dollars, their currency would collapse. So there is through the Bank for International Settlements. You see, they manipulate a lot the currency. The U.S., of course, because it is the reserve currency, and that comes from the Bretton Woods system in 1944. The U.S. was the major holder of gold after World War II, so the dollar became the major reserve currency. So they've got this people still see the dollar as a reserve currency, and it is used for international trade between countries that don't even use the dollar. So that and the petrodollar as well. In the 70s, when the OPEC decided to sell their oil just in dollars, that created demand for dollars. So what? And every country needs oil for their energy sector. So countries that need to buy oil, what do they have to do? Well, they have to earn dollars. So there's always demand for dollars. But I think the petrodollar system is on its last legs because the U.S. is now the biggest debtor nation in the world. It's not a creditor nation anymore. And I think the U.S. Establishment is realizing they can't keep being the reserve currency because uh, they're going to get more and more into debt. So that's I think, and also, yeah, that's why the major European currencies and the dollar, they do have some kind of I've heard from like Lindsey Williams is a pastor. He knew a guy in the 80s who was involved in banking, and he said, yeah, the BIS, those major currencies, they're always trying to protect it. Of course, there's some times like when the pound loses a lot of value, like in 1992. But yeah, the emerging markets, their currencies are a lot more vulnerable because they don't have the political power and they don't have they're not part of this club.
Interesting. If if the U.S. would to lose or transition from the reserve status, do you see like a basket of currencies taking its place, or returning to the gold standard? What do you think?
Well, I think ideally it would be better for the world to be on a gold standard. And I think the dollar, the euro, if the euro survives, because I'm not sure, because the German Constitutional Court a few weeks ago kind of questioned the ECB's money printing. But anyway, I think we'd have a basket of the major currencies would be the dollar still, the euro, the Chinese currency, and that's about it. But the currency, the money used for payments between countries would be gold. You see, but the public in those countries would still use the dollar, so it would be a gold standard. It would be nice if the public could redeem their banknotes for a fixed weight of gold, but I don't think that will happen, unfortunately. So yeah, and the thing about gold, um, and this is why this is maybe unlikely, but the thing is, we're in such a bad situation. I think the world monetary system that if there's a crisis, and I think there will be, they will have no choice but to go back to a sound, honest money system because what a gold standard does, it means that the credit system, the monetary system of each country is not political. It's neutral because gold is neutral. Gold doesn't decide, oh, let's print trillions of dollars of gold. Gold is just a metal. So that would take a lot of power away, though, from the bankers and the politicians. And that would be good. That would be more power for the people. There
Right.
are a lot of people, of course, that think, like Jim Rickards, for example, he thinks we could have an SDR, a World Bank currency, and that would be a basket of fiat currencies. I don't think that would help.
So you're saying that currently the bankers have a lot of power because of the fiat system, and if they were to go to the gold standard, they wouldn't necessarily do it voluntarily. It would be forced upon them.
Yeah, they wouldn't have a choice, the bankers and the politicians. Would that what that would mean would be the end of the welfare state, the end of bailouts for big banks and corporations. Uh, and personally, I think that would be great. It's just that these people, the bankers, politicians, the mainstream media, they control the narrative. And if you said that to someone that this would be great, they'd think you're crazy. But actually, for the general public, would be the best thing that could happen. It would be painful, of course, because many people around the world, especially in the Western world, they've been conditioned to think that the government and the welfare state are there for them, that they don't need to do anything, that they don't need to go to work, and I don't think that's good. But at the same time, it's the system, and they've gone along with it. So the transition won't be easy.
That's right. So as an individual like yourself, seeing all of this happening, how how are you protecting your own wealth? Do you just go with the physical gold and silver? Do you look at some mining companies or even traditional regular companies? How do you protect yourself?
Yeah, I think you're right. Precious metals, some mining companies. The other thing as well, aside from investing, is in stocks or companies, is also investing in yourself, your family, because most people think, oh, I'm gonna invest, and they think of the stock market. I think that's the other thing, even though it's not a bad thing to invest in the stock market. The other thing I would say is try to have as little debt as possible so you're not uh you know liable to risks like with this lockdown. A lot of people with a lot of debt, they've been hurt pretty hard, they if they've lost their jobs. So that's what I try to tell people: always try to have no debt. I know it's hard, but try to pay off debt. Yeah, gold and silver, uh, they're like savings. They're like money. They hold their value. And people say, oh, but it doesn't pay interest. But the fiat currencies now in Europe, it's negative interest. In the US, it's zero. So it's no excuse not to have a little bit of precious metals, I think. And mining stocks, they're good, but you need to do your homework because uh, yeah, there's different kind of mining companies, exploration, junior companies, senior producers, and you have to look at where they have their mines around the world, the political risks. So there's a lot more involved, and there's more speculative, but they do really well when there's a bull market in precious metals because their earnings are affected more by $100 rise in the gold price will affect a company a lot more than just an ounce of gold would be affected.
It's very interesting, and I'm glad. I want to bring out 2 points. One thing is what you said about protecting yourself, and another thing what you said about the mining companies. So, as far as the protecting yourself, I hear too many times, whether it's Peter Schiff or someone else, that people hear, oh, gold is going to go up, and therefore the only way I can protect myself is by buying gold or mining stocks. And going back to my personal experience that I told you when I was in Poland and we had hyperinflation, uh, if you had your wealth in cash, it was wiped out. However, if you had gold, yes, you maintain your purchasing power. If you had a house, it maintained the purchasing power. If you had a good business, it also, as long as it continued to be productive to society, it was productive after the hyperinflation. And
Yeah, you'd have a little bit of a disruption for a few months, and then it would pick
yeah,
up again. Yeah,
I,
because hyperinflations don't last very long.
exactly. The revenues adjusted. These businesses were charging more money. Yes, their expenses went up, but as long as their business was productive, it was okay. The same thing as you said about your personal investment in your person. If you were a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, if you were useful to society as a human, then you it also adjusted. You know,
Yeah,
when they changed the money, you were just paid in different money. So,
that's right.
so yeah, it's not just, hey, we're gonna have inflation, buy gold. No, it's if you again invest in yourself. So I really appreciate that. And then the other thing that you said about the mining companies is, yeah, there's so many of them, and I don't know if you know. And let me just give a little bit of plug for myself here. Uh, I'll send you a book that I wrote, Gold Production from Beginning to End. I wrote it several years ago, and it shows people how gold is produced from A to Z. Because many people, they go into these mining stocks and they have no clue. They don't know the difference between open pit, underground, sulfide, oxide, measured and indicated. They have no idea, but
Yeah,
they're buying these mining stocks because Peter Schiff said gold is going up. I mean, I lost $500,000 in gold mining stocks when the price went against me. So they can be very good when the price of gold is good, it's going up. They can be fantastic, but you have to be in the right ones. Just because
Yeah,
the
it's
price of
very
gold, yeah,
speculative, isn't it,
exactly,
mining stock? Yeah.
exactly. So in terms of talking about books, do you have any books that you would recommend for people to learn about the things that you talk about?
Well, there's the security analysis by Benjamin Graham, about the
Yes, yes,
value investing,
yes.
which you should know about. I mean, I would also watch not just books, but Gold Rush, that series on TV about the it's like a reality TV series, Gold Rush. It shows you. I don't know if you've seen it, how hard it is to get gold out of the ground.
Yes, I've seen this, but
Yeah.
what about books on monetary education?
Yeah, monetary education. Yeah, I would recommend What Has Government Done to Our Money? That's by Murray Rothbard. He was a American economist, and he was part of the Austrian School of Economics. That's one of the very very good book about money. And the other one is about the Federal Reserve, how it works. It's The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. So those two books are really good.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Okay, Mario. Yeah, thank you very much for doing this interview with me. Now, before we finish, can you once again remind our audience how they can, get to hear more of your work, your channel?
Yeah, sure. And you're welcome. I enjoyed speaking with you. Yeah, my YouTube channel is Maneco64, Maneco 64. And I'm also on other platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and you'll see the other platforms if you watch one of my videos. I make a video every day, and I do a live stream Sunday night, UK time. I'm in London, so 9 p.m. London. That's 4 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay, perfect. I will link to your YouTube channel in the description of this YouTube video. And yeah, thank you and have a good day.
You too. Thank you for having me, and take care.